Columbus Day is a federal holiday, but you probably don't get it off from work. You obviously know why, given the press old Christopher gets today. If you still have this romantic view of sailing the ocean and all the high seas adventure, we're gonna stop you right there.
It says you have scurvy.
Scurvy? What is it?
It's an old pirate's disease.
Ah, scurvy. The sickness National Geographic estimates killed around 2 million seafaring sailors and adventurers between the 15th and 18th centuries. When the body doesn't get enough vitamin C, which happens a lot during long sea voyages, it first begins to stink, and it starts to break down. Without getting too graphic, scurvy causes the body to deteriorate in painful and progressive ways, including skin issues, reopening of old wounds, and even neurological effects, left untreated. But wait, there's more. The body also stops producing collagen, which is what holds the whole thing together. And when archaeologists excavated the graveyards of Columbus's La Isabela settlement, located in what's now the Dominican Republic, there were signs that the men had suffered from scurvy. This is weird because the Caribbean is literally ripe with foods full of vitamin C. But when the Columbus crew got there, they sequestered themselves behind settlement walls and rode home to Spain for more food instead of just checking to see what was all around them. Why? Well, as one of the archaeologists summed it up, Columbus himself was more concerned with looking for gold than feeding his people. We all know that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and most of us probably know that he had 3 ships, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. But how many of us know that on Christmas Day 1492, the Santa Maria ran aground on what is now known as Haiti? The ship was toast, so they used the wood to build a fort called Villa de la Navidad, which is derivative if you understand Spanish. Anyway, after 3 weeks, Columbus headed back out, leaving behind 39 sailors with orders to literally hold down the fort. And P.S. find some gold. Columbus was gone for around a year, and when he returned along with 17 ships and 1,200 men, they found nothing but ashes where La Navidad had stood. Archaeologists are still trying to piece together what happened, starting with the exact location of the fort. According to the University of Florida, Columbus and his men built their town near a Taino village. The villagers opened up their doors to the shipwrecked sailors, but by the time Columbus returned, his men had died. Some had killed each other, and the rest had been killed by a rival tribe who also burned the village. But local lore tells a different, equally plausible story. Not satisfied with the meager amount of gold the Taino had to offer, the Europeans started taking slaves and mistresses. To make it stop, the Taino killed the men and burned the town. When it comes to syphilis, this particular STD and Columbus's crew were old friends. You can easily call syphilis one of the first global diseases and say that knowing where it originated, not like that, get your head out of the gutter, and how it spread across the globe might help us understand the spread of other diseases. There are a few pieces of almost indisputable evidence. The first real cases of syphilis didn't happen in Europe until Columbus returned from the New World. Then there's the fact that when researchers started tracing the bacteria that causes syphilis, they traced it all the way back to, you guessed it, the New World. The seldom bathed, stinky Spanish didn't help the cause.
Europeans were sort of swimming in this bacterial and viral soup.
Researchers found another related disease called yaws, which loves hot, humid areas and is transmitted by skin-to-skin contact. The belief is that when Columbus's crew brought yaws to Europe, it mutated to thrive in other hot, humid areas on the human body. To be fair, not everyone agrees on this origin story. There's also an argument that it was the European explorers who brought syphilis to the New World, not the other way around. Either way, at some point it was on the ships and in the sailors, and it was deadly. When Columbus died in 1506, he was just 54 years old. He was suffering from reactive arthritis, and while it's treatable now, it wasn't back then. It caused a heart attack that killed him. Researchers think he likely developed the disease after a bout of food poisoning on one of his voyages. But that's not the only thing that could have caused it. And in Postmortem, Solving History's Great Medical Mysteries, researchers look at what else could have happened. And there are an alarming number of even more alarming possibilities. There's brucellosis, an infection spread to people from goats. There's also a small chance it was syphilis. I mean, why not? But that also seems unlikely given Columbus's symptoms. It's also possible that Columbus was exposed to a bacteria carried by birds like the parrots he took back to Spain. That infection would have been spread through the air, and it's possible the birds he kept in his own quarters ultimately did him in. And Columbus wasn't the only one exposed. Aboard his ships, sanitation was non-existent. There was a plethora of deadly conditions.
What is a plethora?
Glad you asked. It actually means too much or excess. So if the syphilis or arthritis didn't get you, the frequent food poisoning might make you want to jump ship. Columbus's first real settlement was La Isabela, located on the north side of the island now called Hispaniola on the Dominican side. It was home to farms, a fortified town center, Columbus's personal house, and a whole lot of bad karma.
Christopher Columbus! Joe, don't use such dreadful expressions.
Built on Columbus's second journey, things started out bad. There was little food or water, but Columbus ordered his men to plant crops and build a wall to protect their tiny huts. He was apparently the only one who thought the spot was a good idea. Pretty soon, history repeated itself. Columbus set off to continue his search for Asia, while once again ordering his men to find gold.
You! Gold! Now!
Oh, I want to help, but what is gold?
We need to mention this for the sake of being historically accurate. A lot of atrocities that have been associated with Columbus happened when Columbus wasn't around. Yes, he was the governor of the New World, and yes, he wanted that gold, but he also gets a bit of an unfair shake in terms of today's society. Anyway, back to the gold. Turns out the Taino weren't super great at getting gold, mainly because there wasn't a lot of it. And when they got hungry enough, the settlers raided the storehouses of the local Taino. Needless to say, things went all kinds of wrong. Taino groups banded together to drive out the Europeans, and a battle of steel weapons against chemical warfare featuring gourds filled with ash and ground hot peppers. The Taino were so desperate to get rid of the intruders that they destroyed their own food supplies, crops, and homes, hoping to leave them nothing more to steal. La Isabela continued under a cloud of starvation and bloody conflict. The settlement was abandoned in a matter of years. When Columbus and his men discovered the New World, there were already people living there.
Occupied? Someone lives here?
Conventional history has long said that there were two groups, the Arawak and the Caribs. And yes, if you want to get technical, both tribes came from South America, so both discovered the islands first, per se. The Arawaks were kind and welcoming, while the Caribs were demonized as cannibals. According to recent findings, yes, the Caribs did, eat people. But there is some recent research that suggests that Columbus painted the Caribs as super evil nemesis to justify enslaving them. Before they got to see the people-eating part in action, the Europeans were not exactly impressed by the Caribs. In fact, they were super hostile to the Europeans, meeting them with showers of poisoned arrows. But it's complicated, and the experts are still trying to figure the whole thing out. William Keegan of the Florida Museum of Natural History suggests that what Columbus and his crew labeled as aggression were the result of a bartering system they didn't understand. That much seems likely. Columbus often stopped to trade goods with native peoples, and while trades could go well, they can also end in bloodshed if, say, someone had been insulted. Keegan explained, "The point is that the potential for hostilities was always present. Columbus's observations suggest that hostilities were a component of indigenous exchange relations in the Bahamas. There's nothing like coexisting alongside the constant fear of becoming someone's lunch."
We all know Columbus wasn't perfect.
That's an understatement.
We already mentioned how a lot of that is a bit overblown. It's almost like someone ruined his rep, but it's not like Columbus is going to be up for sainthood either. His story is complicated. Columbus's time as governor was controversial, and his men had a very good chance of meeting their end thanks to the man himself. When the Chief Justice of Hispaniola, Francisco Roldan, reported back to the Archbishop of Toledo in 1499, he painted a dire picture of life at the settlement. Columbus sailed away in 1498, leaving his brother Bartholomew in charge. Roldan wrote, "He began to act with such severity that he caused people to fear and hate him, and when I repeatedly took up with him some of the things that I considered improper, he took a dislike to me and appointed another magistrate who would follow his orders." Some of that was because of the Spanish soldiers' treatment to the natives there, but one could look at that as he was protecting his investment. Because at the same time, if one of the Taino people were caught stealing, they could expect to lose an ear, or worse. In short, everybody hated Columbus. Facing starvation, Roldan took some of the other settlers and attempted to reach another village in hopes of finding supplies. Bad idea. They were under attack for 3 days, but finally managed to retreat safely back to the fort. But once Columbus's brother heard the news, he went straight to victim blaming, saying, "I will go there and cut off Roldan's head and those of more than 8 others." Roldan survived by staying away, but when Officer of the Crown Francisco Bobadilla arrived on the scene fresh from Europe, the first thing he saw were the gibbeted remains of 6 Spanish settlers. When Bartholomew Columbus confirmed that there were more executions on the docket, Bobadilla jailed the Columbus brothers and sent Christopher back to Spain in chains. The first Catholic priests to set foot in the New World were part of Christopher Columbus's second expedition in 1493. By 1501, Columbus wrote the Book of Prophecies, boasting that he'd laid the groundwork for converting Spain's new territories to Catholicism. How'd that work out for the priests Columbus took with him? For some, not so bad. Father Ramon Pane spent 4 years living with the Taino and wrote some of the most important works on their history and culture. But just because someone was a priest, that didn't give them special treatment from Columbus. There was a priest among the group of sick, angry settlers who returned to Spain with him in 1496. After, he spoke up on behalf of some fellow settlers Columbus had decided to whip, and as a result, the aggrieved Columbus denied him rations. And what about the missionaries who followed? Turns out it didn't go great for them either. Spain decided to use religion as a way of controlling their new territories, and when they sent missionaries over to spread the word, those people, to quote the National Park Service, lived and worked at great peril among mostly hostile natives. Forts were built alongside missions, and it was only with the ever-present protection of Spanish soldiers that the missionaries had even the slightest chance of surviving. Hey, it's nice to think that deep down, people are decent, that they'd take issue with hunting down those who hadn't been able to find enough gold in rivers and would absolutely, definitely not want to train dogs to be weapons. If you like to think you're the sort of person who wouldn't do something like that, then congratulations. But you wouldn't have survived exploring with Columbus. Good for you. We're not trying to defend Columbus at all, and we're not trying to apply our 21st century mindset to what was going on back then. But the reality is that if you didn't have the ability to keep your eye on the prize, you weren't explorer material. It was the Arawaks, the people who Columbus described as so full of love and without greed, and they are always smiling, who found themselves very, very quickly at the mercy of European settlers and their tribute system, which demanded gold, gold, and more gold. But not even Columbus's system of tributes was enough for many of his men, who insisted that they collect land and people as well as gold. Indigenous people were treated with extreme cruelty. They stopped having children, not wanting to bring new lives into the world that had become a waking nightmare, even as Columbus's priest claimed they rejoiced at being welcomed into Christ's flock. Don't think you would be a part of that? Congratulations.